He locked his twin sons in a freezing steel room and walked away like nothing happened. No noise, no cameras, just two 4-year-old boys, trapped inside an abandoned cold storage unit, screaming for their father, and he never looked back. But one witness did. A dog. What started as a quiet afternoon turned into one of the most disturbing crimes I've ever come across. Not because it was loud, but because it wasn't. You think you've seen what greed can do. You haven't. Not until you've seen a man bury his children for a signature on a will. And yet what saved them wasn't justice. It was loyalty, fur-covered, bleeding, barking like hell itself. This one stayed with me. It clawed under my skin. Tell me what you felt. Would you have followed the dog? Would you have believed the lies? Drop your thoughts in the comments. Let's see how it all went down. The locked door was a slab of brutalist, indifferent steel. Behind it, the barking was a frantic, desperate plea, a sound that clawed at the indifferent silence of the abandoned complex. It had begun, as the most monstrous betrayals often do, with a grotesque pantomime of love. That morning, a Tuesday frosted with the false promise of an early spring, Arthur Blackwood had stood in the doorway of his son's room, a room saturated with the primary colors of childhood and the faint, sweet scent of sleep. All right, little explorers. He'd boomed, his voice unnaturally jovial, a forced echo of a father from a bygone television show. Daddy's got a special adventure planned today. You ready? Leo and Max, identical 4-year-old towheads with their mother's startling blue eyes, had scrambled from their beds, their small bodies thrumming with an almost unbearable excitement. Leo, the slightly more cautious twin, had his stuffed bear, Barnaby, already tucked under one arm. Max, ever the instigator, was already pulling on his miniature hiking boots. They didn't know, couldn't have fathomed, that this was to be their final, fatal expedition. The drive was a masterclass in deception. Arthur, a man whose heart had long ago calcified into something cold and transactional, played the part of the doting father with an unnerving commitment. He'd put on a CD of cloying children's songs, the melodies grating against the turmoil he imagined, or perhaps didn't, brewing beneath his polished veneer. He'd doled out gummy candies, sticky and sweet, a stark contrast to the bitter pill of his intentions. He'd spun a yarn, his voice smooth as a well-oiled machine, about a king's ransom in buried treasure, hidden deep within a secret chamber, just waiting for brave adventurers like you, the boys, nestled in their car seats, backpacks at their feet, tiny vessels containing juice boxes, a shared bag of animal crackers. And for Leo, the ever-present Barnaby, were entirely captivated. Their trust was a pure, luminous thing, a beacon in the gathering darkness of Arthur's soul. They chattered, they giggled, oblivious to the fact that their father was steering them towards an icy, man-made hell. The destination was a relic of a forgotten industry, an old food processing plant, its skeletal frame stark against the pale sky. Weeds choked the cracked asphalt of the parking lot. Windows, like vacant eyes, stared out from rust-stained concrete walls. Arthur, with a chillingly practiced ease, led his sons through a breached chain-link fence, their small hands clasped in his larger, colder one. He navigated the debris-strewn interior, his steps sure, as if he'd rehearsed this macabre pilgrimage. He'd chosen the cold storage unit weeks ago. Inside, he'd staged a pathetic tableau, a few brightly colored, cheap plastic toys scattered near a dented metal footlocker. The treasure chest, There it is. Boys, Arthur announced, his voice echoing unnaturally in the vast, frigid space. The secret chamber, as Leo and Max, their breath misting in the sudden, biting chill, rushed towards the ersatz treasure, their small faces alight with anticipation. The heavy insulated door behind them began to swing shut. Silently, ominously, Arthur watched, his face a mask of impassivity, as they bent to pry open the lid of the footlocker. The thud of the door seating into its frame was soft, almost gentle. The click of the heavy external latch was definitive, final. The children's excited squeals, muffled for a moment, abruptly ceased. A beat of confused silence, then a dawning, terrible realization. Leo's voice, thin and reedy, pierced the sudden gloom. "Daddy!" Max, bolder, rattled the door handle. "Daddy!" It stuck. Then came the screams. Not screams of childish frustration, but of pure, primal terror, heart-shredding wails that bounced off the insulated walls, amplifying the horror. Outside, Arthur Blackwood stood for a long moment, listening. Not a flicker of emotion crossed his handsome, patrician features. His mind was already moving on, calculating the sizable trust fund established by his late wife's doting parents would revert entirely to him upon the boys' unfortunate disappearance, and Sophia, his fiancée, the woman whose expensive tastes and disdain for encumbrances had subtly, or perhaps not so subtly, nudged him towards this precipice, would finally bestow upon him that radiant, uncomplicated smile he craved. She'd said, hadn't she, just last week, her voice like chilled champagne, "Oh, Arthur, darling, a life just for us. No distractions. Wouldn't that be divine?" Inside the frigid, lightless box, Leo and Max hammered their small fists against the unyielding steel. "Daddy, Daddy, open the door. It's cold. Daddy, I'm so cold." Their cries were raw, laced with a terror no 4-year-old should ever know. Barnaby, dropped in the initial panic, lay on the grimy floor, a forgotten sentinel. Arthur Blackwood turned, his back to the muffled sounds of his dying children, and walked away. His stride was even, unhurried. He didn't look back. He slipped through the fence, climbed into his luxury sedan, and drove away from the scene of his unimaginable crime, leaving his sons entombed in darkness, their small reserves of milk and hope dwindling with every passings, frozen minute. A short distance away, a blur of brown and white fur erupted from the overgrown brush near the plant's perimeters. Buddy, the family's scruffy terrier mix, a rescue Arthur had only tolerated at his late wife's insistence, had followed the car, his canine senses prickling with an unease he couldn't comprehend, but instinctively reacted to. He'd heard the car arrive, smelled the familiar scents of Arthur and the boys. Now, he heard the muffled, high-pitched keening. He growled, a low, guttural sound of distress, and began to circle the cold storage unit, whining, scratching at the base of the door, trying to wedge his small body into any crevice. The scent of his boys, laced with a new, sharp odor of fear, was strong here. Arthur, catching sight of the dog in his rearview mirror as he neared the main road, felt a flicker of annoyance. He stopped the car, got out, and shouted, "Get, go on, get." He clapped his hands sharply. Buddy, startled, backed away but didn't flee. His eyes, intelligent and worried, remained fixed on the monolithic structure. Arthur got back in the car, a sliver of irritation tightening his lips. The dog was a loose end, but a minor one. He drove off. Buddy watched the car disappear. Then, with a whimper that was almost human, he turned his attention back to the silent, cold building. The faint cries from within were growing weaker. He barked again, a series of sharp, insistent yelps. Then, as if guided by a force beyond understanding, he turned, not towards the Blackwood mansion, miles in the opposite direction, but towards the distant glow of the small town nestled in the valley below. He began to run, not with his legs, but with a fierce, desperate instinct, a primal urge to save, to alert, to bridge the chasm of human cruelty with unwavering, animal loyalty. Meanwhile, at the opulent, sterile Blackwood estate, Arthur poured himself a generous measure of single malt. Sophia, draped in silk, emerged from the sweeping staircase, her expression artfully arranged into one of polite inquiry. "All settled, darling?" she asked, her voice a low purr. Arthur met her gaze, his own carefully neutral, a placid lake over unspeakable depths. "All settled," he confirmed. He took a sip of his scotch. "I've taken the boys to Aunt Clara's." She was delighted to have them. "A quiet week, just for the two of us, as you wished." Sophia's smile, the one he'd damned his soul for, finally bloomed. "Perfect," she murmured, gliding towards him. Absolutely perfect. But miles away, a small, determined dog was racing against time, against the encroaching cold, against the dying light. His barks, a desperate S, carried on the indifferent wind, a tiny, furious protest against the profound darkness that had just consumed two innocent lives. The sacred bond, the one Arthur had so callously severed, was now Buddy's only compass, his only hope in a world suddenly gone mad. The wind, carrying the first true bite of the coming evening, whipped around Buddy as he stumbled, paws raw and bleeding, onto the cracked asphalt of the service road that marked the unofficial boundary of Oak Haven Township. He was a mess of matted fur, caked with mud from the marshy ground surrounding the abandoned plant, his usually bright eyes wide and incandescent with a terror that transcended animal understanding. He was running on fumes, on the raw, unadulterated fuel of loyalty. Sam Wilson, a man whose 60-odd years were etched into the weathered landscape of his face, was locking up the small shed where the town's parks department kept its aging mowers. He straightened, feeling the familiar ache in his lower back, and was about to head home when the small, frantic shape careened into his field of vision. "Well, now, what in tarnation?" Sam began. Squinting, he recognized the Blackwood's terrier mix, though he'd rarely seen it without the children. But this was a different creature. Wild-eyed, panting raggedly, a low, continuous whine vibrating in its chest. Buddy, heedless of any caution, lunged towards Sam, not aggressively, but with a desperate urgency. He grabbed the cuff of Sam's worn work pants in his teeth, tugging, not hard enough to tear, but insistently. He let out a series of short, sharp barks, then spun, ran a few paces back towards the direction of the old processing plant, and looked back, his entire body a coiled spring of supplication. "Easy there, fella," Sam said, a knot of unease tightening in his gut. He'd seen panicked animals before, but this was different. This was a plea. "What's got you so worked up?" Buddy barked again, a sound that seemed to rip from his very soul, and tugged again, more forcefully this time. Then he repeated the maneuver. Run. Look back. Bark. The message was unmistakable. Follow me. Now. Sam hesitated for a fraction of a second. He was tired. Dinner was waiting. But the raw panic in the dog's demeanor, the sheer, unyielding desperation, was a hook in his conscience. He'd lived in Oak Haven his whole life. He knew its secrets, its quiet tragedies. He also knew the Blackwoods, or at least knew of them. The new money, the somewhat cold wife Arthur had buried last year, the two bright-eyed boys he sometimes saw at the town festivals, always a little too quiet, a little too watchful, and Arthur's new fiancée, Sophia, a woman who seemed more suited to city penthouses than Oak Haven's sleepy streets. All right, Sam sighed, grabbing a heavy crowbar that leaned against the shed. More for snakes than anything else, but it felt like a necessary precaution. Show me. Then, show me what's got your tail in such a twist. Buddy, seeming to understand, let out a single affirmative yelp and bolted, not waiting to see if Sam followed. Sam, his joints protesting, broke into a lumbering trot, the crowbar a cold weight in his hand. The dog led him not to the main entrance of the derelict plant, but around its periphery, through grasping thorns and over treacherous, frost-heaved ground, straight to the featureless steel door of the cold storage unit. The sun was beginning to dip below the horizon, painting the sky in bruised purples and bloody oranges, casting long, eerie shadows. As Sam approached, breathless, Buddy was already at the door, scratching frantically, whining, his nose pressed to the thin gap at the bottom. And then Sam heard it, faint, almost imperceptible at first, then clearer, a tiny, rhythmic tapping. Tape, tap, 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 and interwoven with it, a muffled, choked sobbing, so weak it was almost lost in the moan of the wind through the building's decaying superstructure. A chill, colder than the evening air, snaked down Sam's spine. "Oh, dear God," he whispered. He pressed his ear to the steel. The sounds were undeniably human and small. "Hello," he yelled, his voice cracking. "Is anyone in there?" A faint, desperate cry answered, too weak to form words. "Hang on. I'm here. I'm gonna get you out." He jammed the tip of the crowbar into the seam of the door, throwing his weight against it. The industrial-grade steel didn't budge. He tried again, grunting with effort, veins standing out on his neck. Nothing? The door was built to withstand far more than an old man with a crowbar. Panic, cold and sharp, began to rise in his throat. His mind raced. He fumbled for his ancient flip phone, his fingers clumsy with adrenaline. First, Peterson, Old Man Peterson, a retired welder, had worked at this plant in its heyday. If anyone knew a way into that box, it was him. Peterson. "It's Sam Wilson. I'm out at the old processing plant, the cold storage unit. There's kids trapped inside, alive. I can't get the door open." Peterson's gravelly voice, usually slow and deliberate, sharpened with alarm. "Kids, in the freezer. Stay put. Sam, I'm on my way. Got my old torch. Might be able to cut through. Next, Emily Carter, the young nurse practitioner at the town clinic. She was calm under pressure, resourceful. Emily, it's Sam. Get to the old plant. Now, cold storage. We've got children trapped. They sound weak." He didn't need to say more. Within 15 minutes, a lifetime for the souls inside the freezers. Peterson's battered pickup truck rattled to a halt, headlights cutting through the twilight. Emily's compact car was right behind him. Peterson, a man built like an oak barrel, hauled out a dusty oxyacetylene torch rig, its hoses cracked and worn. "Stand back," he ordered, his face grim as he adjusted the goggles. The hiss of the gas and the sudden, fierce roar of the flame shattered the gloom. He applied the brilliant blue tip to the door hinge, but the thick steel barely glowed cherry red before the heat dissipated. The metal was too thick, his torch too old, the fuel tanks likely low. After several frustrating minutes, he pulled back, swearing under his breath, "Damn thing's built like a blasted bank vault. My torch ain't got the juice." Emily, her face pale but set with determination, knelt by the door, pressing her ear flat against the cold steel, just as Sam had done. Buddy, who had been pacing and whining, now lay flat, his body pressed as close to the door as possible, as if trying to impart his own warmth. He let out soft, rhythmic whimpers, his paws scratching intermittently at the narrow crevice. He seemed to be counting breaths, feeling life ebb away. The silence stretched, broken only by their ragged breathing and Buddy's soft sounds. Then, Emily looked up, her eyes wide with a mixture of horror and a desperate, fragile hope. "I hear them," she whispered, her voice trembling, breathing so shallow. "Oh God, there's someone in there. It's children. They're alive?" Barely. Sam, his heart hammering, was already dialing again. "Police dispatcher. This is Sam Wilson, out at the old food processing plant on Route 7. We have children trapped in a walk-in freezer." "Yes? Children. They're alive, but fading. We need heavy rescue. Now." The response was measured, infuriatingly so. "Sir, we'll dispatch a car to assess the situation. Do you have any idea how they got in there?" "No, I don't know how they got in there." Sam roared. "Just get someone here." He knew small-town bureaucracy. Without a clear crime evident, the cogs turned slowly. Meanwhile, back at the Blackwood mansion, the crystal glasses tinkled as Arthur refilled Sophia's champagne. The charade of normalcy was almost complete. Almost. Sophia swirled the golden liquid, her gaze distant. "Clara, you said," she murmured, her voice deceptively light. "I don't believe I've ever heard you mention an Aunt Clara, Arthur, especially one so accommodating on such short notice." Arthur's smile didn't waver, but a keen observer might have noticed the slightest tightening around his eyes. Distant relation, mother's side, always been fond of the boys. Sophia took a delicate sip, and they went just like that. No favorite pajamas. Leo's dreadful old bear. Max's little rucksack he takes everywhere. You know how they are. "Arthur, they don't go anywhere unprepared for a siege." Her tone was playful, but her eyes, sharp and analytical, were fixed on his. A tiny, almost invisible muscle twitched in Arthur's jaw. He'd overlooked that. The backpacks. He'd been so focused on the grand, terrible act. The minutiae of children's attachments had slipped his mind. Sophia continued, her voice dropping slightly, acquiring a silken edge. "They seemed so excited about your adventure this morning. Strange they'd agree to be shipped off to a relative they barely know without a fuss. Or their treasures." The air in the lavishly decorated room grew suddenly colder. The perfectly arranged flowers on the mantelpiece seemed to droop. Sophia set her glass down with a precise click. A new, chilling thought, unwelcome and insidious, began to slither into her mind, coiling around the comfortable narrative Arthur had constructed, the ease with which he'd arranged it all, his almost preternatural calm. She looked at him, truly looked at him, and a sliver of dread, sharp as a shard of ice, pierced through her carefully cultivated composure. "Arthur?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "What is it, exactly, that you're hiding from me?" Arthur Blackwood regarded his fiancée, and for the first time since he'd set his monstrous plan into motion, a flicker of something akin to unease, or perhaps just annoyance at an unforeseen complication, danced in the cold depths of his eyes. Sophia's question, "What is it, exactly, that you're hiding from me?" hung in the opulent air of the drawing room, heavy and accusatory as a death shroud. He knew, with the chilling certainty of a predator, the precise mechanics of his potential salvation. The terms of his late wife, Eleanor's, will were cruelly specific. A final, posthumous leash. Leo and Max, her precious boys, were to inherit the bulk of her considerable family fortune, but only upon reaching their majority. Should they fail to survive to their 18th birthdays, the estate would revert to Arthur. However, a lesser-known codicil, one Arthur had pored over with his lawyers until the ink blurred, stipulated a far more immediate transfer if the children did not live to see their 5th birthday. Their 5th birthday was less than 6 months away, and Sophia, his beautiful, ambitious Sophia, had been crystal clear, her voice like the chime of ice in a crystal glass during one of their clandestine meetings before Eleanor's unfortunate riding accident. "No stepchildren in our new life, Arthur. No lingering ties, no shared custody, no shadows from the past. A clean slate. Darling, that's all I ask." Her smile had been dazzling, her ambition a mirror to his own. The whispers surrounding Eleanor's death, the spooked horse, the frayed cinch on the saddle, Arthur's almost unseemly haste in moving on, had eventually died down. The investigation closed for lack of concrete evidence. He'd been meticulous then, just as he was now. This new plan had been cultivated with the same detached precision. He'd discreetly paid a disgraced physician in a neighboring state a substantial sum to fabricate medical records, backdated, detailing a congenital heart defect shared by the twins, one that could, tragically, strike without warning. He'd scouted locations for weeks, settling on the abandoned food processing plant remote. Forgotten, its very structure a mausoleum in waiting. The secret treasure hunt was a piece of cruel inspiration, a way to lure them willingly into the abyss. Their innocent excitement a grotesque counterpoint to his cold intent. He could almost see their faces, bright with anticipation as they stepped into the frigid darkness of the cold storage unit to claim their prize. He remembered the satisfying, definitive click of the heavy latch, a sound that had effectively silenced their laughter, replacing it with the muffled, frantic cries that he had methodically tuned out, steeling his heart against the nascent, inconvenient flicker of, what? Regret? No, annoyance, perhaps, at the messy, emotional fallout of a necessary transaction. He manufactured a bland smile for Sophia, hiding something. "Darling, you wound me." A little surprise, perhaps a gesture, but his mind was racing, calculating the potential damage of her suspicion back at the silent, looming plant. Sam Wilson was on the phone with Police Chief Frank Davis, a man he'd known since grade school. The twilight had deepened into a starless, oppressive night. The beam of Sam's flashlight cut a nervous swath across the rusted door. "Frank, you ain't listening." Sam's voice was tight with frustration and fear. "I heard 'em. Emily heard 'em. They're kids. Frank, little kids. That dog, Blackwood's dog. Mind you, he led me straight here. He ain't left that door. He knows. Sam paused, then lowered his voice. Someone put him in there. Frank, this ain't no accident. This was deliberate. Someone tried to commit murder, and that someone knows how to make things disappear. This place, it's a perfect goddamn tomb. Chief Davis, a methodical man often accused of moving at a glacial pace, finally felt a prickle of genuine alarm at the conviction in Sam's voice, at the mention of the Blackwood name. All right, Sam, all right. I'm dispatching a full emergency response. Heavy rescue. EMTs. The works. You said Blackwood's dog. Is Arthur Blackwood there? No sign of him, Sam said grimly. Just the dog. And those poor kids. The call to the Blackwood residence, patched through by the dispatcher to Chief Davis himself, was answered by the housekeeper, Mrs. Evans, her voice quavering. Sophia, standing rigidly beside her, listened on speakerphone, her face a mask of dawning horror. Mrs. Evans. Chief Davis's voice was calm but firm. This is Police Chief Davis. We have a situation involving the Blackwood children. Can you confirm their whereabouts? Mr. Blackwood said. He said he took them to his Aunt Clara's for the week. Mrs. Evans stammered. Sophia's voice cut in, sharp and brittle. There is no Aunt Clara. Chief Davis. Not one that Arthur has ever mentioned. Not one that exists in any family record I'm aware of. And there were no preparations made for any trip. No clothes packed. No arrangements. Nothing. Her carefully constructed composure was shattering, revealing the raw fear beneath. The implications of Arthur's lie, coupled with the chief's grave tone, were starting to form a terrifying, unthinkable picture. Understood, Davis said, his voice now hard. Mrs. Blackwood. Ms. Sterling. He corrected himself, remembering Arthur's fiancée. We need you to stay put. An officer will be with you shortly. Within minutes, the desolate grounds of the abandoned plant were awash with flashing blue and red lights. The cavalry had arrived, fire trucks, a heavy rescue unit equipped with breaching tools, an ambulance, and several police cruisers. The quiet desperation of Sam, Peterson, and Emily was replaced by a controlled, urgent flurry of activity. Thermal imagers were deployed, confirming faint, fading heat signatures within the unit. Oxygen tanks and medical kits were readied. Emily, bless her heart, refused to move from the door. Her voice, though strained, became a lifeline thrown into the freezing darkness. Leo, Max, can you hear me? It's Emily. We're here. We're going to get you out. You have to stay awake. Boys, talk to me. Tell me about Barnaby. Leo, Max, what's your favorite superhero today? She spoke continuously, her words a fragile shield against the encroaching silence from within. Buddy, sensing the shift in energy, the arrival of more help, pressed himself even tighter against the steel. Whenever the faint sounds from inside a whimper, a tiny cough weakened or threatened to fade into nothingness, he would let out a sharp, resonant bark, as if to say, "They're still here. Hurry! Time is running out." His barks became a metronome, marking the agonizingly slow passage of time, a desperate drumbeat against the chilling silence. The rescue team, led by a burly fire captain, assessed the door. Industrial grade, insulated, reinforced steel, he announced grimly. Prying is out. Torching will take too long, and the fumes. We'll have to go through it with the hydraulic spreaders, maybe the saw. It won't be quick, for what felt like an eternity, but the clock insisted was just over 3 excruciating hours. The night was filled with the shriek of metal-cutting saws, the percussive impacts of heavy tools, and the strained grunts of firefighters. Each failed attempt, each snapped blade, sent a fresh wave of despair through the onlookers. Emily kept talking, her voice growing hoarse. Buddy kept his vigil, a small, furry sentinel of unwavering hope. Sam and Peterson stood by, helpless but unwilling to leave. Then, with a final, groaning screech of tortured metal, the locking mechanism gave way. The heavy door, gashed and mangled, was wrenched outward. A collective gasp went up. Firefighters in full gear, equipped with lights and oxygen masks, plunged into the frigid darkness. Moments later, they emerged. The first firefighter carried a small, still form, wrapped hastily in a thermal blanket. Then another, two tiny, fragile bodies, pale as marble, were pulled from that icy, man-made hell. They were terrifyingly still, their faces blue-tinged in the harsh glare of the floodlights. Emily rushed forward with the paramedics, her medical training kicking in, even as tears streamed down her face. They're hypothermic. Barely a pulse on this one. The race was not over. It had merely entered a new, more desperate phase. What did you think of today's story? If it made your day, drop a good in the comments. If it didn't hit the mark, just type 1. Got your own thoughts? I'd love to hear them below. And hey, don't forget to hit subscribe. It's free, and it really helps the channel grow. Thank you so much for being here. The frantic, desperate ballet of resuscitation played out under the cold, uncaring stars. Leo and Max, those two small flames nearly extinguished by an unimaginable betrayal, were whisked away in a scream of sirens, their fragile lives hanging by the slenderest of threads. Emily, her face a mask of fierce concentration, rode with them, her hands never ceasing their work, her voice a constant murmur of encouragement to the children, to the paramedics, perhaps even to herself, a prayer against the encroaching darkness. Sam and Peterson watched the ambulance disappear, twin silhouettes of grim hope against the backdrop of flashing lights. The mangled door of the cold storage unit, a silent, gaping testament to the horror they had breached. Buddy, whimpering softly, sat at Sam's feet, his small body trembling, his gaze fixed on the receding tail lights until they were swallowed by the night. The arrival of police cars at the Blackwood mansion was, by contrast, almost eerily quiet. Two uniformed officers and Chief Davis himself walked up the manicured stone pathway. Inside, Arthur Blackwood was discovered in his mahogany-paneled library, a snifter of expensive brandy swirling in his hand, a Beethoven sonata whispering from hidden speakers. He looked up, a perfect tableau of genteel surprise, as if they'd merely dropped by for an impromptu social call. "Gentlemen," Arthur said, his voice smooth as silk, betraying no hint of the maelstrom of activity unfolding miles away. "To what do I owe this rather late-night intrusion?" Arthur Blackwood, Chief Davis stated, his voice devoid of warmth. "You're under arrest for suspicion of aggravated assault and endangerment of your children. Leo and Max Blackwood." Arthur raised a perfectly sculpted eyebrow. He took a slow sip of his brandy. "My children? Really? Frank? You must be mistaken. The boys are quite safe, staying with a relative. You're wasting your valuable time. And I must say, this is rather disruptive." His composure was chilling, an impenetrable wall of aristocratic disdain. But the foundations of his carefully constructed world were already crumbling. The first blow came from an unexpected quarter. the abandoned plant itself, while most of its systems had long decayed. A single security camera overlooking the loading dock and the entrance to the cold storage units, miraculously, was still operational, wired to a forgotten backup generator that kicked in during a recent power surge. The recovered footage was grainy, ghost-like, but damningly clear. There was Arthur, his distinctive gait unmistakable, leading two small figures, their backpacks clearly visible, towards the cold storage unit, the heavy door swinging shut. And then, moments later, Arthur emerging alone, his silhouette retreating into the gloom, never once looking back. The second blow was delivered by Sophia, pale, trembling, her earlier composure shattered by the horrifying reality of what Arthur had likely done and what he was capable of. She met with Chief Davis at the station. In her hand was a thick vellum envelope. "This was Eleanor's," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "Her original last will and testament. Arthur had a copy, of course, but I found this in her private safe. There are clauses regarding the children and the estate. The financial motive, stark and undeniable, was laid bare. Arthur's desperate need to secure the fortune, tied to the boys not reaching their 5th birthday, painted his actions in the vilest light. Then came Mrs. Evans, the housekeeper, her loyalty to the memory of the first Mrs. Blackwood, and to the children she had helped raise, finally overriding any fear of her current employer. She presented a small digital recorder. "Mr. Blackwood. He made calls," she explained, her voice thick with emotion. "To himself, mostly practicing. He asked me to tell anyone who inquired that the boys were with an Aunt Clara. He even faked a call from her. Using this, she played a snippet, Arthur's voice, distorted into a saccharine, elderly feminine tone, reassuring a fictional worried neighbor about the boys' well-being. It was grotesque. It was damning. The final piece of the puzzle slotted into place when investigators, acting on a hunch fueled by the sheer calculated cruelty of the crime, looked into the boys' medical history. They discovered the recently fabricated records, the diagnosis of a severe congenital heart defect, signed by a physician already under investigation in another state for medical fraud. Arthur had been meticulously laying the groundwork to make their deaths. Had his icy tomb succeeded, appear as a tragic, unavoidable consequence of a pre-existing condition, the trial of Arthur Blackwood became a media sensation, a circus of grim fascination. Reporters dubbed it the icebox inheritance and the father who froze his fortunes. The courtroom was packed daily. Arthur, impassive and impeccably dressed, maintained his air of injured innocence throughout, but the weight of the evidence was overwhelming. The security footage played on a large screen, silencing the entire courtroom. Sophia's testimony, delivered in a low, shaken voice, was devastating. Mrs. Evans, tears streaming down her face, recounted the chilling deceptions. The verdict, when it came, was swift and unanimous. Arthur Blackwood was found guilty. 2 counts of attempted murder in the 1st degree, multiple counts of forgery and conspiracy, and financial fraud. His parental rights were irrevocably terminated. As the judge read the lengthy sentence, a lifetime behind bars with no possibility of parole, Arthur's mask finally slipped. Just for a moment, a flicker of something ugly rage, disbelief, the thwarted fury of a narcissist unmasked, twisted his features before he smoothed them back into an expression of cold contempt. While the wheels of justice ground slowly, another, more tender story was unfolding, Leo and Max, against incredible odds, began their slow, arduous journey back to life. The physical recovery was brutal, fraught with complications from severe hypothermia and frostbite. But the emotional scars ran deeper. Night terrors plagued their sleep. A slammed door could send them into paroxysms of fear. Through it all, Emily Carter was a constant. She had used her vacation time, then taken an unpaid leave of absence from the clinic to be with them at the children's hospital, and later at the specialized foster home where they were placed. She read to them, played with them, patiently coaxed them out of their silences, her presence a steady, reassuring warmth in their shattered world. She helped them understand, in simple, age-appropriate terms, that they were safe now, that the monster was gone. Slowly, painstakingly, trust began to rekindle in their young eyes. Barnaby, the bear, recovered from the cold storage unit and carefully cleaned, became a fixture once more in Leo's arms. Months later, when the legal battles concluded and the question of their permanent guardianship arose, there was only one compassionate, logical choice: Emily, the young nurse who had whispered their names through a steel door, who had breathed life back into their hopes, officially became Leo and Max Blackwood's legal guardian. The courtroom that day was filled not with the morbid curiosity of Arthur's trial, but with a quiet, heartfelt joy. And Buddy, the scruffy terrier mix, once an afterthought in the Blackwood household, became Oak Haven's quiet hero. In a small ceremony on the town green, the governor of the state himself presented Buddy with a specially commissioned silver medallion engraved with his name and a paw print. As the mayor read the commendation, his voice thick with emotion, Buddy sat patiently at Emily's feet, occasionally licking Leo's outstretched hand. "This extraordinary animal," the mayor read, his words echoing across the assembled crowd, many of whom had tears in their eyes, "reminds us that heroism comes in many forms. He could not speak our language, yet he communicated a desperate truth. He could not break down doors, yet he moved human hearts to do so. He never stopped speaking out, in every way he could. For those who had no voice, let his courage, his loyalty, be an inspiration to us all." Sam Wilson, standing in the crowd, nodded slowly, a proud smile on his weathered face. The darkness of Arthur Blackwood's crime had been profound, a chilling abyss, but in its wake, unlikely lights had emerged. The unwavering love of a young woman, the resilient spirits of two little boys, and the fierce, indomitable heart of a small, scruffy dog who had simply refused to let the silence win. The first anniversary of the day the world cracked open and almost swallowed Leo and Max Blackwood whole arrived not with a storm, but with the gentle sigh of an early autumn breeze. 1 year, 12 months that had painstakingly knitted together the raw, severed edges of their young lives, transforming terror into a survivable memory, and planting the fragile seeds of a new, quieter hope. They lived now with Emily, and of course, with Buddy, in a small, sun-dappled cottage nestled against the whispering pines of the Oak Haven woods. The house was filled not with the oppressive grandeur of the Blackwood mansion, but with the comforting clutter of well-loved books, mismatched pottery, and the ever-present scent of Emily's baking. Leo and Max, now a robust 5 years old, had finally outgrown the steel-walled nightmares that had haunted their sleep for so long. Now, Emily would often find them in the morning, curled together like two puppies, murmuring about dreams filled with sunlight, flying dogs, and endless fields of wildflowers. The shadows, though perhaps never entirely banished, had receded, making way for the irrepressible light of childhood. Buddy, too, was changed. The frantic, desperate barking that had once been his only weapon against an unspeakable evil was largely gone. He was quieter now, a steadfast, furry shadow at the heels of his two small charges. His devotion, however, had only deepened, becoming a silent, unwavering current that flowed through their everyday lives. He was their confidant, their pillow, their four-legged guardian angel, his presence a constant, reassuring heartbeat in their reborn world. The old food processing plant, that skeletal monument to Arthur Blackwood's depravity, no longer cast a pall over Oak Haven. In its place stood a vibrant, welcoming structure, its once rust-stained walls now painted in cheerful hues of yellow and blues. Above the newly installed double doors, a beautifully carved wooden sign read, "Buddy's Hope, Community Center and Animal Haven." The entire town, it seemed, galvanized by the horror and the subsequent miracle, had poured its heart, its labor, and its resources into this transformation. What was once a place of near certain death had been reclaimed, exorcised, and rededicated to life. Buddy's Hope thrived. Its dual mission to provide therapeutic support for children who had endured trauma and to rescue, rehabilitate, and train animals to become therapy companions was a beacon that drew people from all corners of the state and, here, rescued dogs, cats, even a gentle old pony, learned to offer comfort to small humans wrestling with big fears. The rhythmic breathing of a sleeping dog, the soft purr of a cat, the unconditional affection of an animal who asked for nothing in return, these became potent medicine. The story of Leo, Max, and Buddy inevitably found its way into print. A sensitive local author, moved by the events, penned a children's book titled The Cold Room, The Warm Heart, illustrated with gentle watercolors. It told a tale not of the darkness, but of the extraordinary courage of two little boys, the unwavering loyalty of their dog, and the love of a community that refused to let evil have the last word. The book spread like wildfire, becoming a quiet phenomenon, a touchstone for discussions about survival, resilience, and the unbreakable bonds that connect us. Perhaps the most profound legacy of Buddy's Hope was the ripple effect it created within the community itself. The center's opening, the public acknowledgement of the trauma the Blackwood twins had suffered, somehow gave others permission to break their own silences. Slowly, at first, then with growing courage, individuals who had long suffered in the quiet desperation of domestic abuse began to step forward, seeking help, telling their stories. The unspoken became spoken, the hidden became seen. A wave of change, powerful and undeniable, began to reshape the social landscape of Oak Haven and its surrounding towns. One crisp afternoon, as the autumn leaves swirled in eddies of red and gold, Buddy lay curled beneath a sprawling maple tree on the grounds behind the center. His eyes were closed, his breathing deep and even, a picture of serene contentment. He was older now, his muzzle dusted with distinguished gray, but his spirit remained undimmed. Leo and Max, their faces rosy from an afternoon of play, were nestled beside him, their small bodies leaning companionably against his warm, familiar bulk. They were reading, their heads bent together over a well-worn copy of The Cold Room, The Warm Heart, their fingers occasionally straying to stroke Buddy's soft fur. Half hidden in the tall grass near the base of the maple, a small, unadorned granite plaque had been placed. It was simple, understated, yet profoundly eloquent, Etched into its surface were the words, "Buddy." He couldn't speak, but he was the loudest voice of all. The sun dipped lower, painting the sky in hues of lavender and rose. From the nearby building, the happy sounds of children's laughter and the contented murmur of animals drifted on the evening air. The wind rustled the leaves overhead, whispering secrets only the trees and an old, wise dog could understand from the place that had once been a cold storage unit of death, a tomb designed by a heart consumed by greed and darkness. A different kind of door had indeed been opened. It was a door that led not to an icy, lightless void, but to warmth, to healing, to second chances. It was a door to hope, forever guarded by the memory of an unbetraying heart and the enduring echo of a love that had refused to die. This story shook me. A father, a locked steel door, and two little boys left to freeze for money. What broke me wasn't the crime itself. It was the silence behind it. What would you have done if the only witness had 4 legs and couldn't speak? Drop your thoughts in the comments. I want to hear what you think. Could you have trusted the dog? Would you have questioned the man? And if stories like this hit you too, don't forget to subscribe for more true story-style fiction that digs deep